can't see the chat on my computer, but there's a monitor here so I can see it. So please feel free to interact with me, shout out your questions in the chat, anything as we go along. But basically, this cohort, I was part of a team called Team xAPI DragonStat. And the question that we were trying to solve is, can xAPI pull data from a game almost totally played in the minds of its players?
Can I pause you for
Pause me.
second? Okay. I just want to make sure that the audio is working.
Yeah, can you guys hear?
Okay. Yeah, can the folks on the phone or on the computer hear us here? We can't hear you.
Do you guys want me to do a fake British accent or anything?
Your eyes Monty Python.
Yes. Idle or Cleese? That's probably best I know. Probably best I know. So, xAPI statements famously expand the reach of what we can capture for learning events beyond just e-learning to LMS, completion or not. One of the powers of this thing is that it can capture learning events that happen in the real world. And so our question was, if that wasn't hard enough, can we capture things that happen in the unreal world, things that are in the minds of the people playing the role-playing game? And how can we use that in a learning way? How can we make sure that maybe someone who's new to the game, we can track their performance and make recommendations for learning interventions based on what we see them doing in this game that's still very much in the minds of the players. And most importantly is, will new players survive the rage of a maddened druid? So this team kind of started as a lark. We were taking part in the xAPI cohort web conferences, and I don't know how it got started. I think I don't want to blame anybody for it, but a few people started joking about role-playing games and Dungeons & Dragons. I don't know if for those that are joining in, hopefully this isn't your first time, but if it is, yeah, Chris, it was definitely a joke. The chat is often very cerebral and focused, but sometimes we can go off on bunny trails, or so I hear. But yeah, basically the idea kind of caught on in my mind. You know, they were joking about it. Yeah, then I rolled a 20.
Or a 1.
Yeah, after a 1. I thought that's where the idea is, like, can we apply xAPI even to Dungeons & Dragons? So I thought, well, here's a chance to blend my geekiness with my nerdiness in the one unholy union. And I just set up the Slack channel, and some intrepid souls joined in. And so as you hear this, it's not just because there's a man-child that happened to get into the group. Like, there are other things that you can be thinking about how to do, like other things that happen, like leadership training. How do you lead a conference, or how do you lead a meeting, or things like that. Other things that definitely happen not on any piece of software, but that it's vitally important that we figure out how do we track performance, how do we give good feedback, and how do we suggest maybe what type of training interventions would be appropriate for someone. So be thinking about that while we're having our little Swords and Dragons fun, all right? Everybody cool? And the chat is silent. Maybe I should have said type F in the chat. I don't know. Anyway, let's go. So before we get started, it occurs to me there may be some among us that don't know what I'm talking about when I say a tabletop role-playing game. So if anybody in the chat or in the room here has a quick, accessible definition that they want to share, I'm going to open up the floor at this moment.
It's storytelling with a structure. So the group around the table is generating a story led by a game master or dungeon master, and there are some rules and some die rolling and some math to judge what happens and doesn't.
Yeah, guidelines, but also highly improvisational. You don't know what the story is going to be exactly. The guy who is running it, the dungeon master, he has an idea of what's going to happen, but player creativity sometimes can challenge his mastery.
Excellent. So that was Peter Gunther and Luke LeClaire for those listening along. doing a much better job than I could have. Did you have one you wanted to say, Alex?
Kind of makes it fun too, the randomness and possibilities.
Yeah. So it's like playing pretend, right? Only one person is pretending to be the world that the players can interact with, and then the players around the table are the ones that are, they are the main characters. They are the heroes of the story. And so they're telling the game master or dungeon master what their character does, and the dungeon master is trying to represent how the world or other people in it or the bad guys or whatever would react to what happens. And whenever there could be a disagreement, I got you, no, I got you, that's where the dice come in. So you have a random roll, and based on your skills and ability, you can add modifiers, and you find out what actually happened. When you shot that arrow at the griffin, did you hit it or not? That's decided by the roll of the dice. And so it can lead to surprises. It can lead to memories that everyone that played walk away with that they treasure that nobody else knows what they're talking about. So
one thing to be clear about, when we say the dice, we're not just talking about your standard six-sided die, right?
That's right.
So when we say you rolled a 20, it's like, wait, how do you get that?
4d6? Yeah, so if you look at the bottom right corner of the slide, and hopefully the controls don't block it from your view, but you'll see a set of the polyhedrons that are used, and you can have any number of sides on them. And depending on your character stats, it'll tell you what type of dice to roll. So are you guys pretty clear? Thumbs up in the chat if you got it. If you don't, I'm sure there's like tons of YouTube channels or whatever about tabletop role-playing games, right? Another distinction, though, as you see in this image, you can play it with miniatures on the tabletop to represent where the different characters are and stuff. You don't need to. There's also theater of the mind where everything happens as described by the game master and the players. So you don't need the miniatures, but that'll come into what we tried to do with it. So, okay. There we go. So when we first started, we did not know what we were doing, as the best projects often start off. There were, Anthony Altieri was part of the group, and he had an idea for using the near-field IR chips in the base of like Disney Infinity, or there's another one, other video games where you have like a platform and you put the character down, and the chip in the bottom of the character triggers a this is this piece. And so we thought, well, if we had a specific adventure that started off the same way, could we use that to track where the good guy pieces were moving, where the bad guy pieces were moving, and then at least judge the performance of movement against what type of player you are? That we quickly determined was way outside the scope, at least with Anthony probably could have done it if he wasn't doing DevLearn and a bunch of other stuff, but speaking personally for myself, I would have had to spend the whole thing just skilling up to even have an idea to how to do that. So one of my ideas was using hallway activity sensors, which they use for like chess smart boards, which they basically can tell the presence of a magnet or not. And so in that case, it's just yes or no, something's here. But if you set it up in an Arduino or something like that to say, every time we run this, it'll start the same way, then you can keep track of where the pieces moved with software. Another idea that we had from David Jumeau is the image you see in the bottom left corner, using JavaScript to actually create this little canvas that has the map, so tracking where the player moves inside of a JavaScript-enabled piece of software was another choice. And all of that was just deep in the weeds without the actual learning stuff. So Irina helped us out by being the instructional designer in the group and coming up with a mind map of all the things we were learning about how to play Dungeons and Dragons. And if you got a sense when we were talking about role-playing games, one of the fun things about them versus like board games or video games is that you absolutely have an infinite range of possibilities. If your mind can think it up, you can do it. It's not like you have to do one of the things the game is already programmed for. So it's hard to try and quantify that into what can you learn, how can you do a good job. So she was mind mapping all the stuff we were learning with the goal of putting it into a learning intervention that we would steer the player towards. So we tried to, with all that stuff started off, we tried to crystallize it. What is our basic idea? And it's, what would a new player want to know? Like, let's say you've never played before in your life, but you got invited to take part in a game with a team that's been playing together for a while. They're like, we've got an opening. Would you like to come try it out? And the things, besides just learning the rules, the two things we thought would be most important is, how do I not stink at playing the game? And how do I not stink at playing my role? I don't want to be a bad team member and get us all killed, but I also want to be fun to play with at the table and fit in with this group of people that may already know. So that was kind of our target of what we were focused on. So how are we gonna answer those questions? So we had 3 deliverables. We wanted an adventure. We wanted a tool to measure performance. And the reason we wanted an adventure, we didn't want to at first open it too wide. We wanted to have like a testable or repeatable scenario that we could do over and over. And in that case, we could like maybe either define for ourselves what the optimal strategy is for each room, or for what could emerge from the data. And we see all the teams that have played this adventure, these are the ones that got through it in the least amount of turns or with the least damage to their party, or whatever. That became less important for other role-playing related reasons. One of the things that we came across as we were studying this is there's two kind of ways to run an adventure. There's what's called the railroad, which is where the game master has a story in mind, and they are just dead set that the players are going to experience everything, all the story beats in that story, as if they're taking part in a novel. And then there's what's called the sandbox, which is like, maybe you've done a few and you're like, I realize these characters are not going to pick up on the quest hooks. They're going to do their own thing no matter what. So in that case, you create a setting and you put some stuff in it, and then you just leave it totally up to the players. And so that kind of informed my thinking about the tool and how we were going to capture. I feel like open is better. I definitely like the idea of having the structure, but I feel like something that can, since we're dealing with infinite possibilities, something that can capture those better works better than something that's railroaded. And then the other thing we wanted was an intervention that teaches new players how to interact with the team and play well their role in the game. So something that either they could watch ahead of time, or something that after they've played the mission, they could, we could recommend, okay, you don't need the whole thing, but maybe these certain modules will help you understand your role. Choo-choo. All right, looks like Chris King is a fan of the railroad. That's fine until you get some chaotic players like myself that like to grab the wheel. So here's the adventure, the Mad Druid's Rage. I thought it'd be fun to have a bad guy who could throw the forces of nature at you. And so, on the first page, Arrival, we've got this read aloud section. So these are the parts that the Dungeon Master would read to the players so that they have an idea what's going on. You are 2 hot, bright days into guiding Winifred Snowmere to Dagmund's outpost and her new life as apprentice to the bush wizard Varrock. Upon her safe arrival, Varrock will pay you 10 gold apiece. You breast to rise and see the village below, ringed on 3 sides by hills covered with a dark old wood. The remaining side is draped with wheat and barley fields, shining in the sun, blah, blah, blah. You get the point. It gets them in the mode, and then it starts with this situation where a bunch of people are in danger, and then you ask the players, what do you have them do? So we wanted to design the adventure such that it would test all the different things that the different types of players need to be good at. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute here. So this is kind of my story map. Of course, a druid wouldn't have a high tower like a wizard. The druid would have a giant tree that grew beyond all measure in the depths of the forest. So here I got my map. I've got my little numbered rooms, and each one of these has a different encounter. Like there's a pure combat encounter, so you can see how they do against that. There's one where there's a puzzle, like that first dome room you see. There's like a bunch of piles of bones on the floor. There's a magically locked door, and there's niches on the wall. And a dryad appears, and you have to either use your social abilities to talk her into telling you the secret, or you have to use your awareness and perception, or you have to use your natural puzzle-solving abilities to learn that you put the skulls in the wall according to the order of their place in the food chain, right?
Spoilers.
Spoiler alert, yeah.
Because I'm not playing this one now.
Yeah. Instantly win the first room. We wanted it to be an adventure that you could accomplish in one setting, too, so that we could run multiple groups through it and get a lot of good data for that. And so the assessment tool that I built in Storyline, this is designed, after we threw away the idea of trying to keep track of their movement on a table, the best idea that I had, and we may come up with a better one in later cohorts, but the best idea I had for how to actually test performance is to build a assessment that someone can use either on a computer or an iPad while they're sitting at the table. They either get one or more players, and they're focused on them, and then they would review them as they play. I would not want the Dungeon Master to do this because they have a lot in mind. They're trying to keep all the details, both the ones known to the players and hidden, and it's a lot of mental work to be a Dungeon Master. So ideally, I'd want to have a Dungeon Master, a team of people to play, and then one person that's going to choose who they're going to evaluate. And so let's roll that beautiful bean footage, and you can see how it works. As you may or may not know, with xAPI statements, it's important to have an identifier, which is usually a name and an email address. So here's where we capture the name and email address for the reviewer, the name and email address for the player that they are reviewing. That would give us a chance to maybe capture some other data about the reviewer. Maybe you got someone that either doesn't know the game themselves and they just don't like you, so they're going to judge you more harshly. Down the road we might be able to compare, okay, does this reviewer tend to be harsh across the board, or was it just one person? Or maybe the person really stank. I don't know, but those are the kind of things we're setting ourselves up for the future. So we got David Jumeau at awesome.com and John at doofus.net. And here's where we get into which class. And I still feel like, even though it's a little railroady, limiting it to 4 classes that fit into a strong role. So we've got Ranger, we've got Barbarian, and then based on the role that they pick, there's questions that are asked. There's a table side. When it was John's turn, was he ready? Was he looking up rules? Was he on his phone? Did he speak dialogue in character? Did he interact with NPCs? Did he interact with PCs? And this is just about how fun are you to play the game with at the table. Now we've got, like, how do you use movement? Charge the enemy? Well, that's a tank move. So if you're the Barbarian, that's a good one. Advantageous ground, if you're a striker, you want to shoot from a distance. That's what you want to do for that. Stay with the group is good for someone who's a healer. Did you use cover? Did you barge in? Did you check for traps? Did you focus damage on one enemy, on one that was already damaged by other team members, big threat, that kind of thing. And then we get to strategy. Never split the party is like a basic rule. Did you split the party?
We'll do more damage that way.
Yeah. Did you provide light? Can you see in the dark, or did you just walk in and get, eaten by a group? Did you save all your powerful stuff for the boss, or use it up? So these are the kind of decisions that, as you're watching someone play, you can be flipping back and forth between the tabs and rating them on how they actually performed in this session. And based on those, we can use variables and storyline to capture a score. Now, we don't need to trigger an xAPI statement for every single thing they enter here, but maybe they get an overall score, or maybe they get a score based on their role in the game, and say, well, you chose a Barbarian, but you tried to act like a wizard, so maybe the feedback they get is next time try to be a wizard or a support class, right? And you could have, this one's for Dagman's Outpost, like the first little scenario I showed you there on the other page. But you could have a page like this for each each encounter in the adventure, which would still kind of argue for having one adventure that you use for this, rather than just letting them use it on any adventure. All right. So that's as far as we got in this cohort. Have you guys ever bitten off more than you could chew? This is what it feels like. But in the future, we are going to need, if we continue this with the next cohort, which I'm hoping to, and please type in the chat if you guys would like to be a part of this, we're going to need teams to play the game and generate the data. We're going to need, we're going to want to put module recommendations for the intervention, so they don't have to take the whole e-learning. They can just take the ones that they need help on. We could do A/B testing. Say, all right, this new person played it without any training. This one played it after going through the entire e-learning module. Or we could do performance improvement and say, everybody play it fresh, and then part of the group will give them the e-learning module, and we'll see if the ones that got the module improved versus the natural improvement of people who just played for their second time, that kind of thing. So here's the people that were involved with the team as far as like came to the weekly WebExes. Anthony Altieri, David Jameau, Irina Milona, myself, and then I put a hand you on there because we are open. This is a fun group, and we are hungry for the ideas that you may have that we haven't thought of, and your perspective. You can feel free to lurk in this group, but you can also say hi, and we won't like put you in charge of a bunch of stuff right off the bat.
So J-Rock, I have one idea. I think you're missing the biggest, most important quality of game measure. How many puns and how bad
That is such a Luke idea.
It's such a big miss. I don't know.
Yeah. So, all right. I'm pretty sure I'm bumping up against the edge of my time. If anybody has any questions or whatever, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Yeah, I'm at John Rock on Twitter and LinkedIn. It's just the whole LinkedIn gobbledygook, and then Jonathan-Rock-MBA.
So, all right. Thanks, John. We appreciate that. Super interesting. And with that, Joanne, if you are ready, we can switch. Oh, we're going to switch over to your slide deck, and we will let you start sharing.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can. Yes, thank you.
Right. So my goal for this cohort was to really get into the JavaScripting and to get into statements. And so what I did was I looked at this early learning childhood profile from the registry. And when I saw that it was dealing with care interactions, educational interactions, assessment, documentation of observations, and exchange and communication between the educators and families, I thought that this would be a really rich profile that would explore a lot of different nuances of the statement. And then when I dug in deeper, I really felt that like all the recipes were just so helpful in really helping me get an understanding of what is it to build these statements, and what would it take. And so the verbs that are around the early childhood education are unlike many of the other verbs. So it's like alerted, consumed, changed diapers, defecated, dropped off, fell asleep, gave medication, picked up, slept, urinated. And so these are the typical ones that are done in corporate or, higher education. And so I was just, I thought that these would be fun to really try to get at, what is involved in statements. And so what I did was I just built a simple HTML JavaScript interface prototype. So I wasn't really looking at how to do this app, but more or less what is the content that is needed to be captured in the app so that I could get rich statements. And so I posted it on my site here, but what I'm going to do for this presentation is just take you through screenshots. And so what I did was I used this Swarm Cloud LRS because I just feel that that's very basic and very user-friendly. And just my focus right now wasn't so much on the reporting at this time, but was really at data capture and analysis and looking at what is involved in statements. And so looking at the interaction statements that the app is able to pull together is like starting from the bottom here is the mother dropped the child off. Then the child consumed formula, the child consumed fruit, the child urinated, the caregiver changed the diaper, the child fell asleep, then the child woke up, and then the father picked up the child. And so then for the experience statement, it's the child experienced a performance task. They experienced a song, they experienced a game of Hide the Animal, they experienced a movie, Where's Nemo, they experienced a book, Are You My Mother? And so I felt like going through these different types of early childhood education tasks, I felt like I was getting a lot of insight into building of the statements. And so then two is like milestones. Did the child progress, or did the child master, a certain standard? And then such as like, this is motor and physical development, standing alone, or pulling up to stand, or, getting to a sitting position without help. And so I just thought that this would be a rich profile to go through. And I also became a grandmother. And so I was going to get hand-on experience. And I thought that this would be just a great profile to go through. And so here's some of the back end of what I was learning, and how I developed the app. And so I really depended mainly on HTML code and JavaScript, because I really wanted to get into like what are the authoring tools doing too as well. And so what it is it's pulling in the xAPI wrapper JS and the crypto.js. Those are the two critical JavaScript files that the HTML files need to link to. And then for each of the various verbs, I came up with custom JavaScript files. And then for each page, what I did was I ended up linking the endpoint, the authorization key, and then the secret code to the, so that we can then get into the SCORM cloud authorization. And I set up just a generic email for each one, just to get the authentication going through. And you would never do this because it's like everything is like right out there. But just since this is a learning environment, I just felt like this would be the easiest way for me to do and to show what I was doing. All right, so then it's like when you look at each of the verbs, so what I did was I just built like these simple HTML pages, and it was like I tried to explore, looking at the profile, what's happening, who's involved, who are the actors, what are the verbs, and then what is the context. And so then, and then really deciding like how simple should this go, and then how complex could it be. And so it's like who's involved in dropping off the child, and then you're dropping off the child would be then the object, and then you would want to know the context to the caregiver who received the child. And then additionally, you would add additional things like what time did they get dropped off. And so it's really just exploring what are the different variables that need to be built, and then what is the end statement that you want to get. And so it's you want to know the mother dropped off the child to the caregiver. And so then HTML code is just really selecting, giving you the opportunity to select and then save the actors. And then what the JavaScript does is just create these as variables, and then the statement is just built off of those variables. And so then that's where I was just learning the JavaScript and then really trying to figure out like how can I build these rich statements. And so then, as well for food intake, and it's consumed. So it's like they're going to consume liquid, and how much liquid, and can they do it by themselves? And so it's really measuring the progress towards autonomy. So it's like, is the caregiver giving them the bottle, or then are they moving up to sippy cups, and are they moving up to being really self-sufficient? And so it's really being able to capture that type of information and then building the statements to go along with it. And again, it's just the HTML code is taking the actors and then creating the variables to build out the statement. And when we go into food intake of solids, the questions that I'm asking myself as I'm building these, where the child consumed fruit, for example, then do we need a menu? Do we import a menu? What are the food goals that they want to introduce? Do we have to include about allergies? And, are there targeted, menus that they want to get at? And then how did the child experience the food? And so then we can go from very simple statements that this is what the child ate, to this is what the child really liked it, or the child didn't like it. It was introduced the first time, second time. And so it's really, what is the type of information that we can be gathering? And then just include that in the control, into the app. And so this page is where like most of the activity goes on. So it's really funny, as like the parents really want to know. It's like I really had to add in like this comments, because there's so many questions. Well, how did they pee? How did they poop? Did they need change of clothes? And so it's really like, what are all the questions that need to be asked? And it was just very interesting, like going through and building statements that are really going to help, you know, give the families and the caregivers, you know, the information that they want. And so that we could build these, you know, incredible, you know, active statements. And then two, it's like, I learned a lot by going into this, like just for even changing the diaper. The changing the diaper is affected, or it needs to be related to the child's action. And so then there's such things as statement refs. And so like that's where I'm learning a lot, where like I'm going to have to go back, and it's like changing the diaper is not an isolated activity, but it has to be linked through a statement ref. And what is a statement ref? And so I feel like this was just a really great learning experience for me. And then even just learning the JavaScript coding of like doing a timestamp and like where does that fall in. And then when I learned how to do it, you know, for nap time, then I can then apply that then to like when they're dropping off and picking up, and I can add the timestamp. But then what I'd like to do to take it a step further is, okay, now that we've got this timestamp, that they fell asleep, they woke up, did they get, you know, how much time did they get? And then they can start capturing, you know, the child really is getting cranky because they're only getting, you know, 30 minutes of sleep, or, you know, they didn't get their nap, or they did not sleep. And so it's really giving this information back to the families, and then tracking that for, you know, learning capabilities. Do they, you know, were they learning better with the naps and whatnot? And then again, like I just approach this as gathering information. It's really not how to do it. And like I would incorporate like QR scanning or codes, and I would type in or use drop down menus. But I really just wanted to explore in this, like, what are the statements that are coming out of these things? And so then when we go into the educational interactivities, the profile recommended that we use experienced. And so I really wanted to like explore experience. And so it's like we're really recording the children experience in books, movies, games, music, songs, and other learning opportunities. But then it's like, what is the information that wants the details that the family wants? And so like I was doing like drop downs of like they watched a movie, they played a game, but then it's what was the title of the activity, what was the description of the activity, and how did the child react to it? And so then we can even add in things like, you know, did we complete the activity? Do we have to go back? How long did we spend on it? What was the child's response to it? And, you know, provide these, you know, rich statements to it. And, you know, and, you know, give them the information back as like, for example, here it was like they experienced Old MacDonald's farm, but then the animals that they experienced were cow, pig, lamb, duck, and horse. So when the parents go home at night, then they can repeat that. And so then the learning is reinforced. Then the assessment and progress of achievements. This is an area that I was really wanting to get into, because so much of learning, and especially project-based learning, and where before we were talking about experiencing, and it's all experience, but what about, I feel like those are like consumption types of verbs, like they're consuming these. What about when the children are creating? And so I really want to look then too, is like, do we really tie it into experience, or do we, what about when it's they're creating things? And so I want to also look at those verbs down the road. And so then with assessment, I feel like rubrics and like even the charts that we just saw in Jonathan's presentation, it's how much do we want to measure, but there's so many different types of standards and milestones, and even just for a 1-year-old milestone, just physical, you know, the movement, physical development, it's like, these are the standards that they can achieve. And then there's social ones, there's emotional ones, there's so many different types of standards. And what is the best way then to do it? And so then that's where I'm trying to then find out, how do we gather this information in the back end? You know, what is the best way with the JSON and all of the JavaScript? And so how can we then code it so that we can automate all of those rubrics and all of those standards, and so that we can then just set up these, you know, little just checky checklists, like I think that one group wanted to do, and then really just start recording all of the milestones that they're achieving. And then in 2, it's like we can add attachments of badges. And so then how rich do you want to go? Do you want to just say a badge, like they got a badge for achieving this accomplishment? Or do we really want to see them walking their first steps, or see them, you know, the first time that they held up, you know, that they can count 1, 2, 3. And so we really can go from like just badges and with the attachments. And so the ability that these statements provide for capturing really rich learning environments and all of the activities that happen in a daycare or any kind of environment, I just felt like I learned a lot. And just I think that just by going in and really getting your hands dirty and looking at the various parts of a statement, I think it's invaluable. And so that's basically where I got to this time around. And these are the resources that I found to be very helpful. I had taken Anthony's LinkedIn course, and I took Jeff Batt's Udemy xAPI course, and I found those to be very helpful. And there was so much of work that's been done in previous cohorts. And so it's like, that's what I just keep doing, is going back to what previous cohorts have done, and then like just look at their files, and then just, you know, look at what they've done, and then just try to learn from that, and then just level up, continue to level up this industry, and then help it grow. And like that's what I did. I went off the ECE profile of the work that was done prior to me, and it's like I hope that I can add to it. And it's just, I'm so appreciative of this xAPI cohort that Torrance Learning puts on for us each year. And I'm signed up for the next one, and it's what I'd like to do to continue down. And this is just about me, and it's like my background is like working. I did XML, but now it's like I'm churning now into JSON and JavaScript, and how can I really take that content? And it's like I really want to get into building statements, and I want to get into doing the rubrics and capturing project-based learning. And so right now it's that's what it is. I became a grandmother, so I'm en route. I'm moving from New Jersey to Phoenix, and I'll be looking for a job, and hopefully that, you know, this, you know, all the work that we're doing with xAPI is like we're really growing this industry, and that there will be a lot of jobs and things out there for all of us in the future. And that's what I continue to, I'll continue to work on the early childhood education, but I also want to go into twine and project-based learning, and really look at some of the things like that MIT is doing with Scratch. And then I also like the Tinkering Studio in, I believe it's San Francisco, and it's really the hands-on learning that, you know, even what Jonathan's project is, it's so different than paper and pencil anymore. All right, so that's all I have, and if anybody has any questions, you know, I'd be happy to answer anything.
Just really appreciate your presentation, the tremendous amount of work you've done, and it really shows the kinds of things you can do with xAPI. And I can see this being applied to things like elder care. You know, a little bigger stretch is if you're working in corporate world, manager and employee relationships from new hire on, and tracking milestones for them, for example, milestone for that role. And so, I mean, you know, you really kind of bring home a lot of the broader, hey, we can do so much more with xAPI than SCORM, right?
Yeah, I think both presentations really talk to how you can get outside of electronic sphere and start recording things and tracking performance. Really good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. Appreciate that. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments in the room here or online?
You might consider trying to beef this up into a real app that you could then market to daycare centers and programs.
I have a question, Joanne. How did, in that our projects were similar, knowing all of the things that it's possible to track, how did you focus on like which ones are most important for your use case?
Well, actually, like that's what I had hands on. I've been taking care of my grandson out here, and so it really is like, what kind of questions are my kids asking me about what did my grandson do today? And it was really, and then that's where I'm finding that to create an app like this, we really have to use like the Internet of Things and scanners and beacons and things like that were used in like some of the earlier cohorts. because it's got to be something that's seamless. So it's like changing the diaper. You're doing it so often, and it's like you really have to be focused on the child. And so it's like I really feel like I want to look into like the scanning and all of that to capture the data, and even the books or the, I'm not reading just one book a day. Like we're going through 10, 15 books. We're going through, 15 activities, games. And it's like, how do you then capture all of that? And so like, that's where I really want to look at, automating all of that capture.
Wireless diaper can.
But then they want questions.
QR codes on
What do we-
babies.
Right in the butt, like you did here, Robert.
Okay. Now I stay behind it.
That's idea.
Yeah, I'm going through diaper training and my son. That is Eric Brock, in case you were wondering. Eric Brock. 4 years old and preschool all at once, so yeah. I want to send the biggest statement. Back at Good job, Joanne.
That's too funny.
Thank you. All right, and we are almost up to